Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Adventure and Mystery Book Club. I am Bill Mallory, branch manager of the La Jolla Library, and I'm so glad that you could join me for today's reading of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. This time we're doing chapters 15 and 16. So glad you're here. The story is getting interesting. Of course, Jules Verne likes to be accurate in his details, and so as we are reading, we are getting a lot of um latitudes and longitudes and cubic uh, feet and lots of uh, Latin names for ocean animals. There will be more of that in the reading today, and again, I'm going to apologize for the any missteps I may say in the Latin animal names. Um, but our story is at the point now where our three characters, Professor Aronnax, the professor of marine biology, is and his manservant Conseil and the harpooner Ned Land have all been taken aboard the amazing submarine, the Nautilus, captained by Captain Nemo. And he spent the last few chapters kind of giving them a tour of the place, and again, that's where the all the measurements in feet and have all come in, and he's opened up this. There was a sort of a sitting room with kind of like a museum with a lot of very rare animal specimens, shells and whatnot. And while the three of them were in this room, these giant doors open up, and they are able to see through these very thick panes of glass, see all of these ocean animals that Professor Aronnax has never had a chance to see in real life yet. And so the last chapter was very sort of waxing poetic about how wonderful it was to actually see these animals in their natural environment. Of course, something that was mostly unheard of in the 1860s. So so there's a real sense of wonder, I think, from the main character, and a real sort of awe of the abilities that Captain Nemo has at his disposal. The ability, in this case, to see these large schools of sometimes rare fish that people just at that time had not had a chance to see. Um, so we're going to continue, of course. Uh, the whole thing is that Captain Nemo is taken himself away from the world outside, the world on land, and everything that he needs, everything that sustains him is from the ocean. And that is true for all the food that they eat and the clothes that they wear and the fuel that they use and the whole nine yards. Um, so it's interesting. It sometimes seems like Professor Aronnax is um, kind of seeing Nemo's point. You know what I mean? He's sort of seeing that, um, hey, maybe this guy has kind of a good idea. He's certainly enamored of the abilities of the Nautilus as a vessel and the potential for research that someone like him could really take advantage of. And so he is. So he's really making lots of notes. So, if you are ready, we will begin chapter 15, entitled A Letter of Invitation. On the next day, November 9th, I awoke after a long 12-hour sleep. As usual, Conseil came in to ask how Monsieur had slept, and to offer his services. He had left his Canadian friend sleeping like a man who spent his life doing nothing else. I let him chatter on as he pleased, without giving much thought to answering him. I was preoccupied with Captain Nemo's absence during our reunion of the previous afternoon, but I hoped to see him again soon. I quickly got into my clothes, made of byssus fabric, Conseil made several comments on them, and I told him that they were made from the shiny, silky threads with which the pinna, a kind of oyster-like creature very common near the shores of the Mediterranean, attaches itself to rocks. In olden days, people used it to make beautiful cloth, stockings, and gloves, and for it is both very soft and warm. The crew of the Nautilus could therefore dress at little cost and without having to take anything from cotton plants, sheep, or silkworms on land. Once dressed, I went to the big lounge. It was empty. I plunged into a study of the valuable shellfish gathered in the glass cases. I also went through the vast collection of rare marine plants, which, although dried out, still conserved their marvelous colors. Among these precious hydrophytes, I noticed some world clados here we go cladostephae, peacock-like padinae, collarpae shaped like vine leaves, graniferous calithemneon, calithemneon, delicate scarlet-tinted ceramacea, butchered that horribly, fan-shaped agars, acetabularia, looking like the tops of mushrooms, and which for a long time were classed as zoophytes, and finally different kinds of sea wrack. The entire day went by without my being honored by a visit from Captain Nemo. The panels of the lounge never opened. Perhaps he did not want us to become bored with these beautiful things. The Nautilus kept heading east by northeast at a speed of 12 knots and at a depth varying between 165 and 200 feet. On the next day, November 10th, the same neglect and solitude. I saw none of the crew. Ned and Conseil spent most of the day with me. They were astonished at the captain's mysterious absence. Was this strange man sick? Had he changed his mind about what to do with us? But, as Conseil pointed out, we were enjoying complete freedom and good food. Our host was keeping his side of the bargain. We could not complain, and the strangeness of our fate held such fine compensations that we had no right to blame him. That day I started a diary of our adventures, which has since permitted me to recount them with the greatest accuracy. However, there was one particular thing about this diary. It was written on paper made from eelgrass. Early in the morning on November 11th, fresh air spreading throughout the inside of the Nautilus told me that we had surfaced in order to renew the oxygen supply. I went to the central companionway and up onto the platform. It was 6 o'clock. The sky was clouded and the sea gray but calm. There was hardly any swell. I was hoping to meet Captain Nemo there, but I had no idea whether or not he would come out on deck. I saw only the helmsman imprisoned in his glass cage. I sat down on the ledge formed by the dinghy's hull and took deep breaths of the delicious salt air. Little by little, the mist began to lift beneath the sun's rays as it rose over the eastern horizon. The sea flamed like a powder trail under its light. The high scattered clouds took on bright, delicately shaded colors, and numerous mare's tails showed that it would be windy all day long. But what was wind to the Nautilus, which could brave any storm? I was admiring this joyous sunrise, so gay and invigorating, when I heard someone climbing up the companionway. I got ready to meet Captain Nemo, but it was the first mate who appeared. I recognized him as being the man who had accompanied the captain when he had first visited us in our cell. He walked forward on the platform without seeming to notice my presence. With a powerful telescope, he very carefully scanned the entire horizon. Then, when this examination was over, he went to the hatch and pronounced the following words. I remember them well, for each morning they were repeated under the same conditions. They were Natron Respok Lorni Virch. As to what they meant, I have no idea. After uttering these words, the first mate went back inside the ship. I thought that the Nautilus would probably once again dive below the surface, and I therefore went down the hatch and along the gangway to my cabin. 5 days went by like this, without the slightest change in the routine of our lives. Every morning I went up on the platform. The same sentence was uttered by the same man. Captain Nemo did not appear. I had given up hope of seeing him when, on November 16th, as I entered my room along with Ned and Conseil, I found a note lying on my table. I opened it impatiently. The handwriting was clear and neat, but somewhat ornate and Germanic in style. The note read as follows. November 16th, 1867. Professor Aronnax, on board the Nautilus. Captain Nemo has the pleasure of inviting Professor Aronnax on a hunting expedition tomorrow morning in the forests of Crespo Island. He hopes no previous engagements will prevent the professor from accepting, and he would also be very pleased if his companions would care to join him. Captain Nemo, Commander of the Nautilus. A hunting expedition, cried Ned. In the forests of Crespo Island, added Conseil. Does that mean he sometimes goes on shore? Asked Ned Land. There seems to be little doubt about it, I said as I reread the letter. Well then, there's nothing to do but accept, said the Canadian. Once we're on dry land, we'll see what we can do. Besides, I wouldn't mind eating a few fresh pieces of venison. I did not even try to understand the contradiction between Captain Nemo's obvious distaste for dry land, even islands, and his invitation to hunt in a forest. I merely answered, let's first see what this Crespo Island is like. I consulted a map, and at 32 degrees, 40 minutes north latitude, and 167 degrees, 50 minutes west longitude, I found a little island which had been first sighted in 1801 by Captain Crespo, and which, on old Spanish maps, was called Roco de Plata, Silver Rock. We were, therefore, about 1,800 miles from our point of departure, and the Nautilus's slightly altered course was bringing us toward the southwest. I pointed to this little rock lost in the middle of the North Pacific. If Captain Nemo does occasionally go on dry land, I said, he at least chooses islands that are completely deserted. Ned Land shrugged his shoulders without answering, and then he and Conseil left. After supper, served by the same mute, impassive steward, I went to sleep, not without some anxiety. When I woke on the morning of the next day, November 17th, I could feel that the Nautilus was completely immobile. I got dressed quickly and entered the big lounge. Captain Nemo was there waiting for me. He got up, bowed, and asked if I would like to accompany him. But, monsieur, I said, first allow me to ask you one question. Go ahead, Monsieur Aronnax, and I'll answer it if I can. Well then, Captain, how is it that you, who have broken off all relations with dry land, own forests on Crespo Island? Professor, replied the captain, these forests of mine ask neither light nor heat from the sun. They are inhabited by no lions, tigers, panthers, or any quadruped. They are known only to me. They grow only for me. These forests are not on land, but underwater. Underwater forests, I cried. Yes, Professor. You're offering to take me there. That's right. On foot? Without your feet even getting damp. And we're going to hunt? We are going to hunt. With guns? With guns. I looked at the commander of the Nautilus in a way that was not exactly flattering. He's gone out of his mind, I thought. He must have had some sort of an attack that lasted for a week, and he's still under the effects of it. Too bad. I liked him better peculiar than crazy. These thoughts could be clearly read on my face, but Captain Nemo merely invited me to follow him, which I did, resignedly. We entered the dining room where breakfast was laid out on the table. Monsieur Aronnax, said the captain, I would like you to have a breakfast with me. We can talk while we eat. I promised you a walk through a forest, but I didn't promise I'd find you a restaurant there. So please eat like a man who won't do so again until late in the day. I did honor to the meal. It was made up of various fish and slices of sea cucumber seasoned with very appetizing varieties of seaweed, such as Porphyria laciniata and Laurentia prima fetida. As a drink, we had clear water, to which, following the captain's example, I added several drops of a fermented liqueur, extracted according to the Kamchatkian method, from a kind of seaweed called Rhodomenia palmata. At first, Captain Nemo ate without saying a word, but then, after a while, he said, Professor, when I invited you to go hunting in my forests of Crespo Island, you thought I was contradicting myself. When I told you these forests were underwater, you thought I was mad. Professor, you should never make hasty judgments about people. But, Captain, believe me. Please listen to what I have to say, and then you'll see whether you were right in accusing me of contradictions or madness. I'm listening. Professor, you know as well as I that a man can live underwater as long as he takes with him a supply of air to breathe. Usually when men work underwater, they wear a waterproof suit, have their head enclosed in a metal helmet, and receive their air from above by means of force pumps and outlet regulators. That's the normal diving apparatus, I said. Right, but under those conditions, the man isn't free. He's attached by a rubber pipe to the pump sending him air, and this pipe is like a chain binding him to one spot. If he were bound like this to the Nautilus, he could certainly not go very far. But then how can you be free? I asked. By using a device invented by two of your compatriots, Roy Quayrol and Dene Ruse, which I have perfected for my own use and which will permit a man to venture into new physiological conditions without suffering any bodily harm. It's composed of a tank with thick steel walls in which I store air at a pressure of 50 atmospheres. This tank is carried on the back by means of straps like a soldier's pack. At the top there is a compartment from which the air, held back by a kind of bellows, is released under normal pressure. In the usual Roy-Quayrol apparatus, two rubber tubes go from this compartment to a mask covering the mouth and nose of the man using it. One is for breathing in fresh air, and the other is for exhaling, and the tongue is used to close off one or the other, depending on the user's needs. But for me, since I have to move around under considerable pressure in the ocean depths, I had to have my head enclosed in a copper sphere somewhat like that of divers, and it is to this helmet that the inhaling and exhaling tubes are connected. Right, Captain. But the air you can take with you must get used up quickly, and once it contains no more than 15% of oxygen, it's no longer any good for breathing. That's right. But as I have said, Monsieur Aronnax, the Nautilus's pumps allow me to store air under considerable pressure, and thus I can put enough air in the tanks to last for 9 or 10 hours. I have no further objections to make, I answered. I would only like to know, Captain, how you light your way along the ocean floor. With a Ruhmkorff device, Monsieur Aronnax. The breathing apparatus is carried on the back, whereas this is attached to the belt. It's composed of a Bunsen battery, which is activated not with potassium bichromate, but with sodium. An induction coil gathers the electricity produced and sends it along to a special kind of lantern. Within this lantern, there is a glass tube in the form of a coil, which contains only a residue of carbonic gas. When this apparatus is turned on, this gas becomes luminous, giving off a whitish, continuous light. Thus equipped, I breathe and see perfectly well. Captain Nemo, you have given me such overwhelmingly convincing answers to all my objections that I hardly dare have any doubts left. But even though I am forced to believe in your Roy-Quay-Roll and Ruhmkorff devices, I still have reservations about the gun I'm going to use. But it's not a gun that uses powder, replied the captain. What is it then? An air gun? Of course! How do you expect me to manufacture powder on board when I have neither saltpeter, sulfur, nor charcoal? Besides, I said, in order to shoot underwater, in a medium 855 times denser than air, you have to overcome a considerable resistance. That presents no difficulty. There are certain cannons perfected after Fulton's time by the Englishmen Philip Coles and Burley, by the Frenchman Fursey, and by the Italian Landi, which have a device for closing out water, thus making it possible to shoot under such conditions. But let me say again that since I have no powder, I use air instead under high pressure, abundantly furnished by the Nautilus's pumps. But this air must get used up in no time at all. Yes, but more can be supplied from the tanks on our backs if we need it. All I have to do is add a special little spigot. Besides, you'll see, Monsieur Aronnax, in these underwater hunting expeditions, we use little air or bullets. But it still seems to me that in this semi-darkness, and in the midst of this liquid so much denser than air, you can't fire far, and the shells must spend themselves very quickly. Monsieur, with these guns, every shot is fatal, and as soon as an animal is touched, no matter how lightly, he falls down dead. Why? Because these guns don't shoot ordinary bullets, but little glass capsules, invented by the Austrian chemist Leinebruck, and I have a large stock of them. These glass capsules are covered with a steel case and weighted with lead. Thus, they are veritable little Leyden jars into which electricity has been forced under very high tension. At the slightest blow, they discharge, and the animal, however large he may be, falls dead. In addition, these capsules are no larger than the size 4 shot, and an ordinary gun could be loaded with 10 of them. I'll argue no more, I replied, getting up from the table. There's nothing left for me but to take up my gun. Wherever you go, I'll go too. Captain Nemo led me to the stern of the Nautilus. As we passed Ned and Conseil's cabin, I called them, and they immediately fell in behind us. We then came to a kind of cell up against the ship's side near the engine room. It was there that we put on our hunting costumes. Chapter 16. A Walk Across the Plains. This cell was both the arsenal and the dressing room of the Nautilus. A dozen diving outfits were hanging on the wall waiting for us. While Ned Land saw them, he showed an obvious distaste at the idea of putting them on. "But Ned," I said, "these forests of Crespo Island are underwater." "Yes, I know," said the harpooner, disappointed at seeing his dreams of fresh meat vanish. "But you, Mr. Aronnax, are you going to put on that outfit?" "Well, I've got to, Ned." "Do whatever you want, monsieur," replied the harpooner, shrugging his shoulders. "But as for me, I'll never get into clothes like that unless they force me to." "Nobody is going to force you, Ned," said Captain Nemo. "Is Conseil going to try it?" Asked Ned. "I follow monsieur wherever he goes," answered Conseil. At a call from the captain, 2 men from the crew came over to help us put on these heavy waterproof suits, made of seamless rubber and constructed in such a way as to be able to bear up under considerable pressure. It was like a strong yet supple armor. The suit consisted of trousers and a jacket. The trousers ended in thick shoes equipped with heavy lead soles. The fabric of the jacket was held firm by copper plates, which protected the chest against the water pressure and allowed the lungs to function freely. Its sleeves ended in gloves that were supple enough for the wearer to perform any normal operations with his hands. As one can see, these highly perfected diving costumes were a far cry from the bulky outfits, such as the cork breastplates and special sea clothes, the boxes, etc., which were invented and praised during the 18th century. Captain Nemo, one of his companions, a kind of Hercules who must have had incredible strength, Conseil and I soon finished putting on our diving suits. We were completely outfitted except for our metal helmets. But before putting these on, I asked Captain Nemo's permission to examine one of the guns we were going to use. A member of the Nautilus's crew handed me a rather ordinary-looking rifle with a steel butt, which was hollow inside and fairly large. This was the reservoir containing the compressed air, which a trigger-operated valve released into the chamber. A magazine hollowed out in the side walls of the butt contained some 20 electric bullets, which were automatically placed in the chamber by means of a spring. As soon as one shot had been fired, a second was ready to go off. "Captain Nemo," I said, "this weapon seems both perfect and easy to operate. I ask only to try it out. But how are we going to get out onto the ocean floor?" "Right now, the Nautilus is sitting on the bottom at a depth of 30 feet, and we have only to be on our way." "But how are we going to get out?" "You'll see." Captain Nemo put on his spherical helmet. Conseil and I did the same, not without first hearing the Canadian sarcastically wish us good hunting. The top part of our jackets ended in a threaded copper collar onto which the metal helmet could be screwed. 3 holes covered by thick glass permitted us to see in any direction merely by turning our heads inside the helmet. As soon as we were completely dressed, the Roy-Quay-Roll devices were placed on our backs. They began to work at once, and as for me, I found breathing very easy. Then, with the Ruhmkorff lamp at my belt and the gun in my hand, I was ready to leave. But I felt imprisoned in these heavy clothes and nailed to the deck by my lead soles. I was unable to take a single step. But they had foreseen this difficulty, and I felt myself being helped into a little compartment adjoining the dressing room. My companions were also helped along and entered right behind me. I heard a watertight door close behind us, and we were enveloped in total darkness. After several minutes, a loud whistling noise reached my ears. I could feel something cold rising from my feet to my chest. Evidently, someone inside the submarine had opened a spigot, allowing the outside water to flood the room we were in. It was soon filled, and a second door in the hull of the Nautilus opened. A dim light entered. A moment later, we were walking on the ocean floor. And now, how can I describe my impressions of this walk beneath the surface of the ocean? Words are powerless to recount such marvels. When the painter's brush cannot even reproduce the effects produced by water, how can the pen hope to succeed? Captain Nemo walked out in front, and his companion followed several paces behind us. Conseil and I stayed near one another, as if it might have been possible to talk through the metal around our heads. I no longer felt the weight of my clothing, shoes, and air tank, nor of the thick helmet inside which my head bobbed around like an almond inside its shell. All these objects, once in the water, lost a part of their weight equal to the amount of water displaced, and I found I was profiting greatly by the law Archimedes discovered. I was no longer an inert mass, but had a relatively great freedom of movement. I was astounded to see how much light reached the ocean floor 30 feet below the surface. The sun's rays easily penetrated this liquid mass, and they made it seem transparent. I could see objects clearly at a distance of 100 yards. Beyond that, the ocean depths were tinted with delicate shades of ultramarine, which turned to a purer blue as the distance got greater, and then disappeared in the midst of a vague shadowiness. Indeed, this water surrounding me was no more than another kind of air, denser than the atmosphere, but almost as transparent. Above me, I could see the calm surface of the sea. We walked over fine-grained sand, without the ripples one finds on beaches where the tide has left its mark. This dazzling carpet acted as a reflector, sending back the sun's rays with surprising intensity. As a result, there was an immense reverberation of light which penetrated each liquid molecule. Will the reader believe me if I state that at this depth of 30 feet, I could see as well as if I were in broad daylight? For a quarter of an hour, I walked over this blazing sand, strewn with an almost imperceptible dust from shells. The hull of the Nautilus, looking like a long reef, disappeared little by little, but its searchlight, once night had come over the ocean floor, would facilitate our return by throwing out its strong, clear beams. This phenomenon is difficult to understand for someone who has only seen a searchlight's clearly outlined whitish rays on land. There, the dust saturating the air gives them the appearance of a luminous mist. But on water, as well as underwater, their electric gleam is transmitted with incomparable purity. But we kept on walking, and the vast sandy plain seemed unending. With my hand I parted liquid curtains, which closed in again behind me, and the trace of my footsteps was quickly erased by the pressure of the water. Soon, some objects looming up in the distance became visible. I recognized a magnificent foreground of rocks covered with splendid specimens of zoophytes, and I was mainly struck with a very special effect produced by the medium we were in. It was then 10 in the morning. The sun's rays struck the surface at a rather oblique angle, and, refracted by this contact as if passing through a prism, they tinted the edges of the flowers, rocks, plants, shells, and corals with the 7 colors of the solar spectrum. It was a marvelous feast for the eyes. Colors crisscrossed one another in a veritable kaleidoscope of green, yellow, orange, violet, indigo, and blue. The entire palette of an enthusiastic colorist. How I would have liked to describe to Conseil the impression this made on me, and compete with him in uttering phrases of wonder. How I would have enjoyed, like Captain Nemo and his companion, being able to exchange thoughts by means of previously arranged signals. So, for lack of anything better, I talked to myself, shouting inside my copper helmet and perhaps wasting more air than I should have with these vain words. Conseil and I both stopped to admire this marvelous spectacle. Confronted by so many specimens of zoophytes and mollusks, he was obviously classifying. The ground was covered with polyps and echinoderms, different kinds of Isidae, cornulera, which live in isolation, tufts of virgin oculinae, formerly called white coral, bristling fungi, shaped like mushrooms, and sea anemones holding onto rocks with their muscular discs, all formed a flower bed dotted with porpitae dressed in their collars of azure tentacles, starfish studding the sand, varicose astrophytons, which looked like delicate lace embroidered by the hands of water nymphs, and whose borders moved gently in the eddies produced by our walking. I hated the thought of squashing beneath my feet the brilliant specimens of mollusks which were strewn over the ground by the thousands, concentric comb shells, hammer shells, wedge shells, which can actually jump, top shells, red helmet shells, wing shells, and so many other products of the inexhaustible ocean. But we had to keep going, and as we walked, we could see swimming overhead schools of Portuguese men of war, with their ultramarine blue tentacles trailing along behind them. Jellyfish with their milky white or delicate pink bodies, edged around with blue, all shading us from the sun's rays. The Panapyrae, Pelagiae, which in the darkness would have strewn our path with their phosphorescence. For a quarter of a mile, these wonders continued. Whenever I stopped to admire them, Captain Nemo would motion for me to keep moving, and I would have to set out again. But soon the ground changed. The plain of sand was followed by an area of slimy mud, which in America is called ooze, entirely composed of silicous and calcareous shells. We then crossed a prairie of seaweed, oceanic plants which had not yet been uprooted by the force of the water and which were growing in wild profusion. This thick, soft lawn would have rivaled the most velvety carpet woven by the hand of man. However, there were plants not only underfoot, but overhead. A light arbor of marine plants classified in the luxuriant family of the algae, in which there are more than 2,000 species, crisscrossed the surface. I could make out long ribbons of sea wrack, some globular and others tubular, Lawrenceae, Cladostephani, with their slender foliage, and some dulce, which looked like cactus fans. I noticed that the green plants remained nearer the surface, while those colored red occupied a medium depth, leaving the black or brown hydrophytes to form the gardens and flower beds on the deeper parts of the ocean floor. These algae are a real prodigy of creation, one of the marvels of universal plant life. This family produces both the smallest and the largest plants on the earth. Of the smallest kinds, as many as 40,000 have been counted within a space of 1/25 square inch, whereas sea wrack has been found measuring almost a third of a mile in length. It was about an hour and a half since we had left the Nautilus. It was now almost noon. I could see this by the right angle at which the sun's rays entered the water, and by the fact that they were no longer refracted. The magical colors had disappeared little by little, and the emerald and sapphire-like nuances had vanished from our world. We walked with a steady step, which resounded on the ocean floor with surprising intensity. The slightest noises were transmitted with a speed to which our land-trained ears were unaccustomed. Water, in fact, is a better conductor of sound than air, and carries it 4 times as fast. Just then, the ground began to slope sharply downward. The light became uniformly shaded. We reached a depth of 300 feet and a pressure of 10 atmospheres. But my diving suit was so constructed that this pressure caused me no discomfort. The only unpleasant sensation I experienced was in trying to bend my fingers, but even this soon disappeared. As for the fatigue I should have felt after walking 2 hours in such an unaccustomed costume, I felt nothing. The water helped me move with surprising ease. At this depth I could still make out the sun's rays, but only feebly. Their brilliant intensity had given way to a kind of reddish dusk, halfway between day and night. Nevertheless, we could still see our way clearly, and it was not yet necessary to start using our Ruhmkorff lamps. Just then, Captain Nemo stopped. After waiting for me to catch up to him, he pointed to several dark masses outlined in the shadows a short way off. That must be the forest of Crespo Island, I thought. And I was right. And we'll end it there. That is the conclusion of chapter 16, as our heroes go on their hunt into what is essentially a new world for them, something entirely different, and unless you're Captain Nemo or his crew, entirely unseen by anyone else. So we'll pick up again on Friday at 4 p.m. With our next 2 chapters. Thank you very much for being here today. I'm so glad that you could join me for this reading. I hope you're reading along at home. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you on Friday. Thank you, everyone.